Aha! The European platformer. It has not always been celebrated for its excellence, especially not nowadays. A lot of people treat these games with utter contempt for various reasons, including but not necessarily limited to incredibly cheap looking and ugly characters, overly colourful and garish art design, overuse of graphical tricks like parallax scrolling to the point where it actually gets in the bloody way of the game, too many games that are overly fast and rip off Sonic or are generally just cheap versions of something better, too many games that are slow and dull and concentrate on very naff puzzles, over-reliance on unfair gimmicks and bullshit designs such as leaps of faith, utterly ridiculous obstacles like lethal droplets of water, and of course, having to collect absolutely bloody everything in order to finish any sodding level ever. These are just a few of the many irksome niggles that your favourite YouTuber will beat a European platformer half to death with whenever one happens to come up in conversation. Some of these criticisms are, well, quite obviously legitimate. You won't catch me trying to deny that. But, and I overstress that again, just like Guru Larry, but that doesn't account for every European platformer. While most Euro platformers certainly share at least one of the aforementioned faults in common, you'll also find a lot of creativity in the genre, and a lot of worth. So I've taken the time to compile a list of 9 Euro platformers, specifically for the Amiga, that categorically do not suck. Now, while I could go on the offensive and defend the well-known games that I do enjoy, the likes of Zool or James Pond 2 or Gods or hell even Super Frog, I've taken another approach. These 9 games aren't particularly well known. In fact, they are what a certain shaggy-haired YouTuber might call hidden gems. These are some very cool games that, for the most part, have fallen well under the radar, but they most certainly deserve to be dragged out again. The first game here is probably the most well known in this whole video. It's generally thought of as a Miggy classic, but I think it's a great one to set the scene and introduce some of the other awesome platformers out there. It's Lionheart. You can kinda tell it's special just from the box art alone, cause I mean, it's beautiful, isn't it? And the game is much the same. This was by the brilliant German studio Phalion. They prided themselves on pushing the Amiga and the ST to the limit with their games, although it was never at the expense of good gameplay. Lionheart is one of the most gorgeous titles of a lineage that certainly takes inspiration from Shadow of the Beast, that much is true, but gameplay wise it knocks the more famous Psygnosis game into a cocked hat. Still, it is worth lingering a bit on that dazzling artwork. Sure, it certainly uses a lot of parallax. You'd be hard pressed to find an Amiga game that uses more than this one does in fact. However, in the case of Lionheart it doesn't actually feel like it's too much. A lot of that is thanks to Phalion's ace in the hole, the artist Henk Nyborg. Nyborg's work was and is outstanding. This is one of his best, but you can also find his mastery on games such as Flink and The Adventures of Lomax, along with newer games like Turrican Tribute Gunlord, the amazing Xeno Crisis, and his own successfully crowdfunded upcoming title, Battle Axe. In short, he's really good, and the art here is in service of a fine platformer. Now, as you might expect, it's not necessarily the quickest of games. Our hero Voldin is a muscle-bound sort who's waving a big sword about. Attacking is something that does take a little bit of getting used to, as you have to hold the button down to access a quite impressive range of attacks, but it does soon become pretty natural, and as easy as it is for this game to immerse you just through presentation, it plays very nicely. You look at this as well as most of Phalion's other games, and you can't help but be so sad that the studio ultimately only lasted a few years, wrapping up in 1994 and sending their talented crew spinning off to various places like Blue Byte and Psygnosis. If you haven't checked this game out properly yet, I implore you to do so. It's one of the Amiga's best. But for something that's quite similar in aesthetic to Lionheart, but unfortunately isn't quite as well known, you really ought to have a look at Odyssey. This game was created by a studio named Unconscious Minds that was essentially a two-man outfit. Chris Mullin coded it, Rhys Millage did art and sound, and both collabed on the design. Chris made an appearance on Lemon Amiga's pages many years ago now to say that originally it all started as a very simple Mario clone, but gradually evolved into this quite epic platform adventure over, well, quite a long period. The final product was released by UK software house Audiogenic, and we can almost count ourselves lucky that it made it out at all. Aside from Odyssey not exactly being like Audiogenic's usual fare of sports games, it was also one of their last titles. Not too long after its release, Audiogenic sadly ceased trading. Between all of this and the game's release in the autumn of 1995, you can probably see why Odyssey is largely only known by dedicated Amiga fans. Which is of course a massive shame. This absolutely staggering title is the best puzzle platform on the Amiga, certainly one of them, and indeed one of the best platformers of the whole era on computers. I myself only became aware of the game quite recently thanks to Owl82's long play channel, and it's barely left my head since then, cause my word is it good. It is sort of Metroid-esque in a way. You have 7 levels in the game, you can enter and exit the first 5 of them as you wish, and you must collect all of the hidden crystals. These hidden crystals will help you complete the whole task because they will allow you to turn into various other creatures with the push of a button, such as an insect that can jump long distances but is hard to control, or a strong armadillo who's turned into a rock, a bird, even a tiny spider that can see in the dark. They all have their uses, and you'll need a lot of them to finish the game. Your generic human isn't wholly useless, mind. They have a sword after all, so they're generally not too bad when it comes to the whole attacking thing. Odyssey, as a game, actually feels very modern. It's all atmospheres and subtle cinematic touches, no music or anything. We've got a fair bit of physics in the platforming and even regenerating health. With a bit of a clean-up, it feels like the sort of game you might see making waves on the indie scene nowadays. There is a little bit of jank. The combat with the sword can be a little bit annoying at times, but this is a very meaty adventure indeed, one that will happily keep you going for a good couple of hours at least. And of course, it's certainly beautiful, one of the prettiest Amiga platformers you'll find. It is possible to think of this game almost as an unofficial 4th Shadow of the Beast title. They are quite similar thematically. Again though, the gameplay here is far superior, it has to be said. I love this game. Being such a late Amiga title, it was sadly never going to get the recognition it deserved, and I do recognise that some of the jank and general long-windedness of the title may be a turn-off for some, but I reckon that this is a special game indeed.
Ooga. Ooga. Ooga.
Here's something a bit less serious. It's not every day you get to play as a caveman pedalling around in his makeshift gyrocopter, offering a taxi service to his fellow prehistoric pedestrians, is it? However, you can do exactly this in Ugh, released in 1992 through the Playbyte label. The game's makers, Ego Software, mostly dealt in promotional games for various companies, and that's certainly a subject for another video coming soon, but they're actually still around today. They're quite famous for the X series of space simulation titles. Now, we do need to address the Tyrannosaurus Rex in the room. While you don't find too many games like this one, there is a C64 game that's a hell of a lot like it. Good old Space Taxi. Much like in Ugh, here you have to ferry passengers across multiple screens to different locations, avoiding plenty of obstacles and doing it as quickly as possible. And so, Ugh can be considered Egosoft's homage to a classic Commodore title that predates it by about 8 years, although it certainly does have a different and kookier theme. Fans of Space Taxi will unsurprisingly find this to be pretty enjoyable too, most likely. We've got the same delicate flying around and the same level of challenge. Oh boy, there's often lots to do just in a single level, and really not a lot of time to do it all in. I also have to say that emulation, which I admittedly use for all these things because, well, it's easier to capture, can be quite a pest here. It's even more challenging to play this on a gamepad, as the controls are very sensitive and require the delicate touch you can only really get with a joystick. So it is worth playing this on proper hardware with an old joystick if you can, or having a 9-pin USB solution that allows you to plug a joystick in. Now shockingly, I've never been one for joysticks, and I used to play everything with a pad, even on the Amiga, so naturally I am awful at this game. But I still have fun with it, and I love the style. Anything miniature like this game usually does get me going. Even if it is a lot like Space Taxi, there aren't too many games like this pair, and so you should definitely have a little look at Ugh. Although with that title I imagine it must have been quite embarrassing to specifically ask for this game at the shops. Do you have a copy of Ugh, please? Up next we have another fairly late game, Naughty Ones from 1994. This little beaut was made by Henrik Mikkelsen and Jacob Hansen of Danish demo scene group Melon Design and published by Interactivision for all things Amiga. There's a regular ECS-OCS version, an ARGA version, and even a CD32 version. But despite this, the game's not particularly well known. Looking at it I can kinda see why, but it is a real good one. Naughty Ones is something of a throwback. It's a single screen flick platformer and does feel a fair bit like a continuation of an old line, one that goes all the way back to the likes of Manic Miner and Jet Set Willy. Having said that, it certainly plays a bit faster than those games, your heroes do have an attack, and it is certainly more accessible than a lot of those old 8-bit platformers might be. The attack is a classic you often find in European games. The ball that arcs and never just goes in a straight bloody line, making it challenging to hit enemies in front of you. You find that quite a lot and it is often not welcome. Having said that, you can bounce the ball off walls in this game, which is actually very handy indeed. You kinda need that a lot of the time. Even if this game may not be making any waves in the looks department, it is one that slowly draws you in. I was a bit nonplussed at first, but eventually found it hard to actually put the thing down, because it does what it does very well indeed. Clearly the duo behind this game had a soft spot for old 8-bit classics. Naughty Ones pays a nice little tribute to those, and it's certainly worth your time if you enjoy those old games too. Okay, this might seem a trifle silly. I mentioned earlier that one of the many things people don't like about Euro platformers is that many of them were ripping off Sonic. And now, one of the games I choose to showcase in this video, meant to show off some really good Euro platformers, is perhaps the most blatant Sonic rip-off of them all. That makes perfect sense, doesn't it? But then, Ocean's Kid Chaos is a very good Sonic rip-off. It's probably as close as you can get on the Amiga to actually play in a Sonic game. It helps that it comes from mighty fine stock. The game was developed by Magnetic Fields, specifically with design from Andrew Morris and coding by Sean Southern. These are the guys who made the frickin' Lotus games, so they're basically Amiga royalty, and their talents certainly aren't wasted on a platformer, even if it is one that's quite derivative. It feels like a much smoother experience than many of the other Sonic rips like, say, Super Frog. The speed's just right instead of being too fast, and the levels are actually built for purpose rather than being a total mess of obstacles. The game's certainly bloody hard like a lot of Euro platformers, but it's a bit fairer than others. The main problem with the game is that, well, visually it is a bit of a mixed bag. I mean, you have an ugly kid who's got a big club that juts out as he jumps, which just looks pretty crap in all honesty. However, the concept that this kid is a caveman transported into the modern world with a mission to lay waste to all things bright and beautiful and all creatures great and small is great. Most of the fun comes from endlessly bouncing off of pretty flowers and animals, destroying everything you touch. Still, it is all a bit uneven, and there are reasons for this. For a long time in development, the game was known as Cosmic Kitten, with an anthropomorphic character to match. However, it was decided that this was going to be way too close to the game's inspiration. So, to stop Sega's lawyers snooping around, the design was changed to the destructive boy we see here, and the name was changed at first to Kid Vicious, and then finally to Kid Chaos. Obviously all this had a pretty negative effect on the game's artwork, but it's still a fine enough title, and worth playing if you so happen to be looking for a really good Sonic-esque title on the Amiga. Righto, here's something considerably less derivative. Blob Duel is one of the lesser known games in Psygnosis's extensive Amiga library, but it's quite an interesting one indeed. A platformer where you control a blob who can happily skirt around walls and ceilings, and indeed will need to in order to beat any of the levels. There's a couple of other games that allow this sort of very clinny play, System 3's Putty, Millennium's Morph, Bullfrog's Flood, but Blob Duel is definitely the best of the lot. How so? Well, it's quite fast, which helps. Our malleable hero takes a little bit of getting to grips with when it comes to figuring out how he takes jumps and the like, and how he can actually deal with enemies, but it becomes pretty natural once you figure it all out. Now, as with 90% of all Euro platformers, this is all about collection. Not only do you have to collect a certain number of gems, but you also have to collect from defeated enemies before finding the exit. It works very well here because it's not like most of the stages are particularly long, and they're not just left to right jobbies. This isn't like some games where you end up all the way at the sodding end of a stage and you've still got a bunch of crap to collect, so you have to go back. There's a bit more discovery here. And the presentation is really good. It's not exactly Psygnosis's usual serious and prog-rockish style, but it's very classic. Kind of like an even better Magic Pockets, I'd say. This is another one of those games that you might be puzzled by at first, but like Naughty Ones, it'll definitely pull you in if you let it. And it helps that there's not too many other games like it. Very recommended. Here's another one that's worth your time. Arabian Nights. This one comes from Chrysalis, whose games were usually a mixed bag, it has to be said. They were responsible for games like the Manchester United Football Times, an inexplicable game based off of Hill Street Blues, and various others. If I asked most people in the know to name a Chrysalis platformer, I reckon they'd probably go for the rather average Soccer Kid, which loads of you across the pond may know as Kid Cleats. But this game right here, Arabian Nights, is a much better game. Arabian Nights is, in general, a very nice and competently made puzzle platformer. There's nothing about the puzzles that are particularly taxing or anything like that, and perhaps it's not the biggest standout or anything visually, but it is all done quite nicely. There is, of course, a fair bit of collecting involved, but it's trussed up a little here, with gems and the like used as currency that you need to buy various items that you need to complete the level. What's more fun is that you find this currency mainly through exploration. There's loads of hidden areas and the like in the levels, and it's a lot more fun to find these than it is to simply bomb through a level from A to B and hope you can find enough trinkets along the way to meet the requirements for finishing it. We've got some nice music from the great Matt Furness, the graphics are okay, some of the other stages like the Magic Carpet and the Minecart rides are a little bit ropier, but generally speaking we have quite a cool little platformer here. Certainly a nice distraction for those who like puzzle platformers where you seek out items and take them to some person or other who needs that item. It's good. Lollipop is quite a cool title. It's another Danish game, much like Naughty Ones, that did originally come out on PC but also made its way onto Amiga. Pretty late on too. This is another game from 1995. It's not exactly well known in the slightest. This isn't even the most famous platformer where you play as a wind-up toy released in its year, and Clockwork Knight on the Sega Saturn isn't all that famous. But this could well be the best of them. Our heroic doll has, somewhat inexplicably, come to life with an insatiable lust for all things sweet, and her quest to find sweetness will take her out of the toy factory she used to call home and to many different locales. Fair to say there's not all that much plot here then, but the game definitely shines on the highly moody and very well drawn graphics front, being a joy to look at. Just as well really, because it did come on 5 discs back in the day, which is quite a considerable amount for a platformer. It's a bit more no frills than a lot of the others we've seen, not much collecting to speak of, not much in the way of puzzles, just a cool little A to B type platformer. I think of all the games that I've covered in this video, this is the one that I would expect to have seen get a conversion to the 16-bit consoles. I think it would have had a shout if it didn't come out as late as 1995. As it is, it's something that just deserves to be plucked out of its late Amiga obscurity, coming out at a time when the system was sadly all but dead. Thanks Commodore, thanks ESCOM, thanks to all of those who achieved that. Well done. Our last game is a particularly high note. If I were to pick 3 games from this set of 9 that you absolutely should play right now, it would be Lionheart, Odyssey, and our final game, Traps and Treasures. Much like Odyssey, it's a puzzle platformer, only one with an even more epic tale of development. Traps and Treasures is mostly the work of just one man, a coder named Roman Werner who worked for German software house Starbite. He negotiated a deal to make this game, and then he spent over 3 years working on it. He had many run-in battles with the studio, who had determined it was taking too long and were often fixing to cancel it, before finally Roman sent a finished copy of the game to them with a placeholder title screen, to be replaced once he'd gotten paid. But that didn't matter to Starbite. They put the game out anyway, without paying Roman, and then promptly went out of business. Roman went to the courts and was able to recoup some money back, but after legal fees he had very little to show in terms of money for all those years of work. And yet, despite all of this, he welcomed, and indeed still welcomes, the praise that the game received and the love it gets from the Amiga community. As well he should, because this game is exceptional. There's only 4 levels as such, but they're huge, filled with multiple parts and many fiendish puzzles indeed. Rest assured that the adventures of our pirate hero and his attempts to rescue his crew will keep you for a good few hours. Much like Odyssey, there's a fair bit of atmosphere going on, with only minimal bits of music but a really nice bed of sound to make up for it. It feels so nice and cinematic. And it's bloody gorgeous. Usefully too, it's gorgeous in a very European way. You'd never be able to mistake where the game came from, that's for sure. Everything about this game then is just so very engrossing. It's far superior to many other more famous platformers on the system. It certainly deserved to be more successful and to reach outside of the world of the Amiga, and quite clearly the game's coder deserved far more than the paltry amount of Deutschmarks he had to show for all of his work. Play this game today and you will find perhaps the best counter to any idea of all European platformers being bad. Well, hopefully this video has given you this game as well as many others to enjoy. Euro platformers are certainly very different to both American and Asian ones, that's for sure, but we've covered 9 games here that show how much worth these games have got beyond the more famous titles with their Chupa Chup sponsorship and endless reams of meaningless objects to pick up. You won't regret giving any of these a try, so go do it. And until the next time, I'll be seeing you later on. Bye for now. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, please check out my social media. Please do like it, subscribe to the channel, all that good YouTube stuff, and also for some exclusive content, including wrestling documentaries and various other things, perhaps you'd like to look at my Patreon. You could join this list of awesome people here: Alexa Jones Gonzalez, Andrew Dalton, Andy Capt, Arcade LY Webmaster, Asobi Kwan DX, Brian Henniger, Chris, Conrad Pritchard, D. Zulio, Rimwan Sutter, Dagorath Dungeon Keeper, Dave Cook, David Rose, Dustin Cooper, Gary Samaden, Geordie Alex, Glunnafef, J.S. Manchild, James Brown, Jason Alexander, Jeff Ladd, Mateus Gramzov, Martin Pataki, Nate Milbank, Piotr Margel, Ren Bimon, Rusty Kelly, Seth Robinson, Simon Gulliver, Stuart Christopher, Tariq Amir, Tim Wald, Yerka Operator, and to all the rest of my very glorious and very, very awesome community. Thank you so much, and goodbye!